Let's look through this code. So in this session, we will go through the first part of a three-part series on how to find a particular person within a particular location on a group of Stargazers within a repo on GitHub. So the thought process here is, hey, I want people that are interested in this repo, but I really only want people within some certain geography. So you can do this manually for hours by hovering over the person and looking to see where they're located, and then opening their profile and grabbing their information out one at a time. Or we could write a script to do that for us. So there's several steps we need to take here. The first being identifying all of the people on the page, and well, that may not be the first step, but looking at where their location is at and then pulling those all together. So first things, let's look at how to get the individual's location. So within the network tab here, we will look at what happens when we hover over one of these people. So this person is in Egypt. We know there's a location there, so let's hover over that first. And then if we look down at our network, we see a request here. We can get that request by just copying as fetch and then pasting that into our browser. And so this is more or less what that looks like here. So if we pasted that in, you can see this looks very similar to this. The only thing different here is that I pulled out some extra information that we had, which was this refer link, and then I pulled the ID off and then pasted it as an argument that we're passing through, because we want to do this many times, and so we can do that by creating a function and then passing the ID that we want through there, as well as the location that we're looking to search for. So let's test that out. This is the ID we want. We'll use a regular expression to look for the location, and here we're going to look for Egypt, since that's what we're going to find. I can't type. And so these are the two arguments that we will put through this function. And so when we run the function, what will happen is we will request this document that comes up here. We will convert it to the response to text, and then we will read that text and use a regular expression, this GeoSearch, to test whether or not that is in there. So we say Egypt test this text data and return whether or not it's true or false. And we're not seeing anything because we didn't log anything to the browser. We just ran the script. So if we want to see something, we could say console log, and then we see down here that it's true, so we got a match. Let's search for something else on that person instead and see what we get. Atlanta. False. They're not located in Atlanta, so cool. That's step one. So we have this function working, and we can remove that log. We no longer need it since we've tested it and know that it works. What next? Well, next I want to go through each one of these, right, and figure out who is in the location for each page. And so to do that, I would want to iterate through every item, and doing that, I can run that here. So this function that I'm calling getStargazers, it takes a URL argument, so a link, and then that GeoSearch as well, uses a fetch request to go grab the link that I passed through. In that case, or in this case, it'll be this, or up here where we call window location href, it's going to be the current page that we're on. So let's test this out. Just grab that, I don't need that. I need the current page. And then I need the search that we're going to run. Let's run Moscow. Let's see what happens. There we go, we got 2 items. So what do we have here? Let's look at what this function is doing. So the first thing it does is, again, the same thing as above. The makes a request, converts the request response into an HTML page so that we can make some calls on it using these functions up here. These functions are an abstraction that it lets me have cleaner code down here. And so this calls get element by class name, get element by tag name, get element by ID. This is something I use to validate regular expressions. This is a function that just creates a timeout as a promise. And this is a function that creates a random number for me, a random number between 1 and whatever I pass through it as an argument. So if I said 100, it'll be a random number between 1 and 100. And this function unique gives us a unique array. So if we pass an array of items through it, if there's any duplicates, the response will be that array without the duplicates. Okay. So down here, let's look and see what's happening. So we get that doc, right? And we say we want the class name repository content. So why do we want that? Well, if we go in here, what we're after are all of these items, and they are under this repository content class. If we copy that, it looks like there's only one of those, and so we can just call that first one, and we know that the list items down here will be all of the people that we want, and within that, we should be able to look at the first A tag and get the ID that we're after, as well as the link to the person's profile. So we call that class name and get the first index. We start counting it with 0. And then we convert. First, we then go down and grab that follow list item class name here. We could also call the tag name list, but if there are any other LIs down in there, we'd grab them too, and that would throw us off. And if we search this, we can see that it does have 30, which means that it's just going to be these 30 responses. We really only need this first part because this information is just extra stuff that is used for defining CSS. So you can even see it's called that float left, border bottom, meaning, all right, float this stuff left, and then here's the border bottom that is accompanied by it. Right? Once we get that list of items, then we can wrap it in this array from function, which is essentially saying, hey, I've got this array-like thing here, and I want to convert it into an actual array and not a list of elements in this case. Then we can use the map function to iterate through every single one of those items, and then that gives, we can assign it just an arbitrary variable here, item, and then we can do some stuff to get down at the information we're looking for. So specifically here, we want the attribute data hover card URL, which is going to have the ID that we need in order to make that request from the previous function. And we really just need this part of it. And so when we get it, we'll just chop off everything that is not a number by saying, hey, replace everything that is not a number. So \D is matching a number. Plus means one or more. We make it global so we get everything. And then we replace it with nothing, meaning we only get numbers as the returned variable. And then we also want the href, which in this case is the link to the person's profile that we want to look at. So we can check that ID, and then if it's the ID we want, we can pass that link through and then go check for that information elsewhere. And then finally, we'll just return that as an array of two items, being the ID and the person's, the link to their profile. From there, we're calling this function. I'm not sure why I have, oh, okay, never mind, I do know. So specifically here on GitHub, when we have a next button, when we click that, you can see that this is not like a page number that we can iterate through. It's an ID that we need to grab. So it's not like we can just say, hey, there's this many Stargazers, there's this many, 3 or 30 being the case. And so if we divide by that, then we know the page is, and we can assign the page number, which would be the normal method. But for whatever reason, we can't do that here, which complicates matters, but no worries. We'll just go ahead and every time we look at a page, we're going to grab that link here and make sure that we return it with the rest of the information that we grabbed so that we can move forward with what we were doing. Makes things a lot more complicated, but it works out. Cool. Then we have this function here. And this says check Stargazers, which is this function that runs the getHoverCard function that we looked at first. So we pass all of these followers, so all of these IDs that we grabbed and their links, we pass them through up to this check Stargazers function along with the search item. And then we say for each one of the IDs in this array, loop through it and go check to see if they are in that area that we want to search, and then return true or false, return whether or not it's there. And so here, then this variable is going to always be true or false on every iteration. True is, yes, this was a match, so push it up into this array, it being the link that we want to go get. So we're not going to push the ID that we got here, we're going to push the link to the profile, which is assigned here as the second item in the array that we passed through on this iteration. So this is a multi-dimensional array. It has, basically it has the ID and the href just over and over and over again, 30 times specifically. Okay. And then finally, when that loop is done, we return that filtered list, which would then be this. And then finally, we will create an object which will allow us to define the next page as an object and the matched URL array as an object. And then that was what we found. Let's run it one more time to see what the response is. And here in the network, you can see it making all these requests for the IDs. And then here we go. This is our response. And so when we return this down to the next function, that next function sees, okay, this is the next link we need to go to. These were the matching links that we got returned. Cool. See? this all back tight together and then look at the next function. So where is this getting called again? It'll be down here in this main function loop, which says loop through all hover cards. So meaning we're going to go through every single page, loop through them, and return them. So the first thing we do, and here it gets a little bit complicated. The first thing that we need to do is, again, create an empty array that we can throw these links into on every loop. But before we do that, we kind of need to know how many there are, so we know how many pages to go click next through, or not click next through, but essentially do that. And so we just have a quick function up here that does that, and it says, oh, let's walk through it. All right, so we need to get what this button is, what the link is. We can do that by calling the container here of the paginator, and we want to look at the links here. In this case, there's only one link because there's not a previous item, but in all but the first and last, there will be two. So what we've done here is we say, hey, give me this class, right, the container for these links, and then get me the A tags in that. So that's tn, which is this function here, saying get element by class name. And we do this just so we don't have all this gummed up in here. Once we have that, then we have an array of these matching A tags. And we want to filter through that array to just get the one where the inner text is next. And so we can do that with this filter function. It's a cool array function that says, hey, filter on whatever your argument is. And so each one of these A variables that we're just throwing out there could be anything, call it B, C, frog, whatever. We want the inner text of each one of these A tags, and if it's next, then keep it in the array, otherwise filter it out. And finally, because we know we're specifically only ever going to have one next button, we know that the array will always only have one item, and it will always be that first item, and so we can just call the href as a result. Meaning, when we loop through here, we get our the next URL that we need to go to. And you see that this is up here as well, because when we run this down here, we need to do the same thing every time and make sure that we're calling a different item. So we run this first once, right, to get our number of Stargazers. Then we run I might have skipped over something there. I feel like I did. I think I went to the pages instead of talking about this. No, we talked about that. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's good. So anyway, basically every time this runs, right, here's where we were. We're not here, but get next page URL. So every time we run that, we get the next page that we pass through there. Cool. So we have the number of pages we're going to loop through. This math seal says take this number and round it up. So 2,755 divided by 30, round it up. Then we get the response from our get Stargazers, which again gives us that object containing the link to the next page, as well as the array of filtered profile links that we want to go grab here in a little bit. And we can then assign that next page URL to this variable, next link. And then before we move on, since we grabbed this here, since we have the array of filtered URLs, we want to go ahead and push those into this array before we start looping through the rest of them. And we want to check to see if that array has anything in it before we try to push something, or it might throw an error. And so we do that by just saying, hey, is this array greater than 0? If so, go ahead and get each one of them for each, this being each item in the array, and then push them into the array. Then we can go through the for loop, and we start off by saying, arbitrary variable I, while I is less than the number of pages we need to loop, iterate through it. So I is I plus 1. So this can be said by saying I is equal to I plus 1. And this is just the shorthand of that. It's easier to type. And then we're just validating, okay, as long as this link is true, then go ahead and do this stuff, the next steps. And so this loop handles everything after the first page. And so we then assign a variable, we do the Stargazers thing again that we did up here. We're just going to throw a quick wait in there. It's like 1/10 of a second. And then we get these results, and we reassign the value of the next link to this reslink variable. And so this gets overwritten every loop, which allows us to then go to the next page without having to know what that page is before we create the loop. So that was the workaround that we needed to do. Then we got the URLs, which is essentially, this is essentially the same thing we did up here, right? And so that loops through every time. It adds them to this array, and then finally returns that array of profile links to us. And then finally, we just need one more function that will run this again, right? So, and then we pass that stuff through there and run the whole thing. So let's give it a quick run and see how it works. This time, we're going to search for China. And this will take a minute. Let's check it out. Whoops. I think I renamed something. Yeah. There we go. Let's try that once more. We can look in the network and watch this work. So we're looping through all the profiles. You can see we move to the next page. We move to the next page again there. Did it again here. So 30 at a time, then we move to the next page. And you can see it stop for a fraction of a second there every time. And then here are all the requests that we've made. So we get a rough idea of where we're at. We're like 15% of the way through right now. So yeah, that's going to take a minute. But while that's running, let's talk through some things here. So you may or may not be aware of the await function, or the async function and the await keyword. The reason we need that is because if you make these fetch requests without the await keyword, it will fail. So a JavaScript function will just run, and it's not going to stop. It's just going to go, go, go. It's something called blocking and non-blocking. JavaScript is non-blocking by default, which means it's not going to hang up unless you explicitly tell it to, and we can explicitly tell it to with this await keyword. The reasoning behind that is really, JavaScript was built for the web. It was certainly not built initially to do this. This is a fairly new feature. And the whole point of having JavaScript like this is so that you can load pages quickly and you don't have like some choppy web page that you would have if you had a blocking function. But when we're making fetch requests, we need it to wait, because if we just said, hey, res is this fetch, and then boom, 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 before it could even respond with the request that it made, it would already be done, and you would have an undefined variable. Let's check and see where we're at in the network. So cool, we're about 39% of the way through. Getting there. Definitely don't want to accidentally run that again. see if there's anything else we can go over here while we're waiting for that to run. Oh, you know what? We should fix something. I'm not terribly happy repeating these things a few times, so we call this at least twice. Once, twice. I guess we only call it twice. But yeah, if we called it 3 times, I might want to change it. But I guess I can live with it only being... Let's pull it out. We can create another function. It needs to be an async function. And we'll say get doc URL okay. Looks like our script just finished, but let's go ahead and do this real quick. And so what we'll do here then is, instead of saying this every single time, which is only twice in this case, but instead of having to do that, we can just say var doc is equal to get doc, and we can pass that URL through here. And so it just makes our functions a little bit cleaner here by pushing this up into its own separate function that checks the URL we pass through and converts it into a document and returns it to us. So then we can replace this down here with this. And we need to make sure we put in the await keyword, or that will return with nothing. Oh no, it is still running. Oh no, we have an error. Cool. Only one. Looks like there's a bad user ID or something just failed in it, but whatever, it's only one. Cool, we're almost done. And so when that returns then, what we need to do is the next step that we'll cover in the next video is go through each one of these profiles and get the information that we're looking for. So the next step we'll do will actually not be, it'll be half of getting the profile details. So in the next step, we will look at how to get the email address if it's not listed here, because it very well may be here. It just isn't shown. Almost done. And when it's done, it should log this array that we returned here. This is pretty readable, not too bad. So you'll notice this function isn't an async function because we're not making a fetch request. We are just passing through a document. And really this could have been down in here, but this thing was getting kind of, it was just getting kind of messy down here, and I didn't want to have any more clutter in it, so we just removed it up into the did this fail? Oh man, that's sad. So we can't see the output because this array is scoped within this function. So let's figure out what happened here. Cannot read property href of undefined. Okay, well let's fix that so it doesn't happen to us again. I didn't test this code before I ran it, just so I completely rewrote this thing a few minutes ago or an hour ago, and then was just testing it live with you here, which is cool. We get to learn some stuff. So what we want to do here is say link, and then we'll say if this is true, give us the link, otherwise just return null, and then this condition down here will prevent this stuff from running if it is null, right? That's disappointing that we have to run the whole thing again, but we're going to do it, and then hope that it doesn't fail on us again. I think what happened is I know what happened. So we started with 0 here, but if you recall, we did the first page already up here. So we really should start with 1, or we can say -1 here. We'll just start with 1 here, and then that should fix the problem for us. And then, yeah. Let's run it again. And then also, let's console log the links as, we'll log it twice. We'll do it as a proper array, and then we'll also do it as a string. So we do JSON.stringify links. The reason we do that is if you want to copy this out of here and grab these links, you can't really do it if it's an array. I mean, you can, but then it's all messed up. This will allow you to easily copy it. Okay. So we did China last time. Let's do somewhere else. Oh, and we can do multiple locations too. So let's do I don't know. Let's do Atlanta or Boston or MA we'll just do Atlanta or Boston. Okay. And you can do as many of these as you want by doing the or. And before we run that whole thing again, let's refresh it and run it this way so we can see the count in our network of where we're at. All right, so it's going to take another few minutes. And did it just fail? Yeah, it did. Because I didn't return. So when we assigned this a link here, but we didn't return anything, and so it just, which, hey, you know, we know our condition is working now, so that's good. It should just stop now if it fails over here. So yeah, that was the plan. That was the plan all along. so this will take a few more minutes. Let's see if there's anything else we can clean up here while we're waiting. Maybe we can look at this probably too and see. I don't know if I specifically went into that. So if you inspect here, this is what we're after. And so we just called the class counter. I think I ended up calling this table up here first, which probably don't need, but I'm going to leave it for now. I mean, we can check to see if yeah, okay, we did actually need it. There's multiple class names here. And we can just call the first one if we know where we're at. And so here we know where we're at, and so then we can always just call the first one, so that's good. And then we can look at this condition here. Also, we should talk about what this question mark is in this. It's known as a ternary function. It's basically an if statement. So instead of having to say, you know, if, you can just say a question mark. It has to follow a specific format, but it's a little bit cleaner to read, I think. So here we're saying, hey, you know, if this is true, the same way we did up here, then give it to us. Otherwise, just return a 0. I said a 0 because, I don't know, it's basically the same thing as null or false, at least in the cases of if we're checking for whether or not something is true. All right, we're about a third of the way through it again. We can do a little preview of next time. So this is the data we're after. We want the first name, and we want the company if it has a company. We want the location, and I don't think I called or I got these links in the first iteration of it, but I think it's worthwhile to get these as well. And, you know, we can go get other stuff too. I think it might very well be worthwhile to go dive into the repos and like get a cursory view of what are the things they're working on. Like, we're not going to go too detailed, but we can at least say, okay, these are the repos they own, and these are the languages that we have within those repos. I think that would be worthwhile. Looks like, goodness, are all these guys, is everything in here forked? Okay, no, not everything. And so yeah, we'd want to split out what's forked and what's not as well. So maybe we'll do 4 lessons on this, because this is actually another project that I want to work on anyway, so it's probably worthwhile to do some of this work within this series. Specifically, you know, when you search on LinkedIn, or no, when you search on GitHub, when you search by language, it gives you the most common language that they use, and that only. So it looks like JavaScript is this guy's jam, but maybe you just needed someone that knew a little bit of Jupyter, and this guy's not going to show up. Or maybe you just needed a little bit of C++, and this guy's not going to show up because the majority of his stuff is JavaScript. But if we go through a geography and look at everyone and map out all of their stuff, then we can go and dive in and search for these specific things and say, hey, you know, give me the people who have, you know, at least 3 Pythons and at least, you know, 4 JavaScripts, right? But only those. And it's a much better search than what we get by default, which is, hey, it's no, GitHub isn't for recruiters. So, not hating on them for not having a good search, but we are going to fix it. All right, we're 60% or 70% of the way there. almost there. What else do we have here? Anything else that we can clean up? This looks pretty decent. Again, this is just the first step. We need to do a lot more here. You know, we've got to go dive in like we were just talking about and get the additional details. Then we need a script to convert it into a CSV format. And finally, you know, we really need to slap a UI on there so that people besides ourselves can use it. I mean, people like ourselves can use it, right? It'll be easier if this is just like a little bookmarklet or some sort of Chrome extension. And to do that, we need a UI. Should be wrapping up here. Yep, almost there. A couple more seconds. If it fails on us again, then we'll address it in lesson 2. Cross origin block. No. There we go. Cool. So we only had 14 that were in Atlanta or Boston, but these are the links that we would then go through and grab those additional details on. And then, you know, we can copy it here if we just, you know, wanted to start looping through those, but we'll do that in the next session.